Outside the Box Reviews, Giant Monster Mania, we're taking a look at the Bandai Tamashii Nation's SH Monsterarts Godzilla repaint figures. I decided that since I have reviewed the normal version of all 5 of these Godzillas, but Bandai has since gone back and put out new versions of these Godzillas in a different color, then we take a look at them all in one big chunk. So, starting from the left, we have the Comic-Con Explosion Godzilla, the Godzilla Jr Rebirth version, the Godzilla 2000 Special Color Edition with the silver dorsal plates, the Godzilla 2014 Spitfire Edition, and the Godzilla 1964 Emergence version. And as I mentioned before, these are all straight up repaints, and because I've reviewed all of these individually, we're not going to be taking the usual in-depth look at these figures. I'll make sure those links are available for you guys. But we're just going to take a look, compare these to their original incarnation, talk about what's changed, talk about what stayed the same, if accessories are still there or not, and we'll go from there. So, first off, we will be taking a look at the Comic-Con Explosion Godzilla. And this one is a straight-up repaint of our original Godzilla figure in the Monsterarts line, the 1994 version of Godzilla. So, basically a generic Heisei take on the Godzilla sculpt. This one was a Comic-Con exclusive, and if you haven't figured it out by now, the gimmick is its translucent orange plastic, as opposed to the original version that was fully painted up to look like normal Godzilla. The overall look of it is pretty cool. It's really a bright orange translucent plastic, but in areas it fades into this yellowy plastic here at the fingertips and at the dorsal plates. The eyes were given a nice fiery red. The inside of the mouth also has a nice fiery red tongue. Another good point about the translucent plastic used here is that it doesn't really let you see the ball joints or anything else underneath too easily. It's definitely a more opaque translucent plastic. So you don't get that problem you get with a lot of translucent figures where you're seeing all the internal machinations of the figure instead of really being able to enjoy the figure. And unlike the real original version of this figure, there are no accessories with this one. The first release of the 1994 Godzilla came with a breath effect piece, but all subsequent releases did not. So this falls more into that second release category where it doesn't come with anything. And despite this being a repaint, this is one that I'm really happy I picked up. It was one of the ones I put off for quite a while. But to me, it is a great piece to have as a meltdown Godzilla, taking up that 1995 look where he's dying at the end of Godzilla vs. Destroya. And granted, he never really looked like this in the film, but I really like having a figure to represent that, especially because I've devoted a whole shelf to Godzilla vs. Destroya. Our next repaint is kind of an interesting one because this gives us theoretically a completely different character in the repaint. This is the Godzilla 1995 Rebirth version, or more specifically the Godzilla Jr Rebirth version. He uses the exact same sculpt as the Burning Godzilla seen there on the right, but instead of being Godzilla himself, it's his son fully grown at the end of Godzilla vs. Destroya, if you want to believe that and use that as a justification for buying this repaint. In all reality, Bandai just took the superior articulation of the Burning Godzilla figure and did it in a classic Heisei era Godzilla deco. So in a complete reversal of our last pair, the translucent parts have been taken away, replaced with more traditional opaque plastic and the normal charcoal gray of Godzilla. So the paint job is a little more what we've come to expect with Godzilla. We have his normal yellow eyes, his normal teeth, normal everything. Nice gray paint job there on his dorsal spines, and this really completely embodies the standard Heisei look for the giant radioactive lizard. The one interesting thing with this is the Burning Godzilla was known for having a lot of gaps in the sculpt. This version, to me, at least in my example, seems to have fewer gaps in the sculpt, but the joints are overall looser. It's very common for my upper torso to pop off the lower torso. Granted, pops right back on, no problem at all, but something to be aware of with this one, a bit of a flaw there. And with this figure, there are accessories, some that came with the original version, some that didn't, and it's missing some. So I don't have them handy at the moment, but if you go back and look at the Burning Godzilla, same pieces, he does come with his alternate hands. I don't really see too much of an issue with them. There's just slight different poses in the way his hands are gripping, but he does still come with them, which is nice. Things we are losing here are the Maser tanks. Burning Godzilla came with 2 different versions. One was like an ice tank, and one thing was a freezing Maser tank. unique, and we don't get those anymore, but doesn't make quite as much sense here with this version of Junior. The one accessory we do get, however, that's unique, kinda, is a breath effect piece, and before anybody says it in the comments, I'm not entirely sure if I grabbed the right one. I can't tell from looking back at reference photos which shade or hue of fiery reddish orange was the correct one for Godzilla Jr., so I may actually have the wrong one here, but we do get the standard fiery effect base, which we got since the original release of the first Godzilla, this time done in an orange plastic. Standard Tamashii arm here with the multiple joints throughout it, and then pegging into the top, you have the standard breath effect beam, the kind of splayed out end here, the fiery texture, and then the section back here designed to fit right into Godzilla's mouth. So a really redone accessory, but kind of nice to have, though I feel like doing the Rebirth version, it would have been a really cool way to get us a blue one back into the market. Up next, we have the Godzilla 2000 Special Color Edition, and to some degree, this is the most boring redo. This is one that I picked up really just out of a sense of completionism. The original release on the right there from 2000 has a lot of the same details on it, except it has the really cool purple spines. This new version has silver spines. It also appears to have a slightly greener paint job overall, and many people have told me it fits in as a Godzilla from Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. And I guess it does just about as much as this sculpt fits in as a Godzilla 2000. Overall, the coloration isn't a whole lot different. They did kind of add this tannish section here on his chest. As I mentioned before, there is a bit of green kind of added into the scales. It's kind of hard to pick up. The eyes are a slightly different color. The gums seem to be a little more bloody red looking. But the big difference really are these spines. I feel like this is really a release just if you missed out on the web exclusive Godzilla 2000 and you need to get a replacement for it on your shelf. And just like the original release, no accessories whatsoever, just a figure. Next up is the Godzilla 2014 Spitfire Edition. And this one to me is actually one of the most interesting and unique versions that they've put out as a repaint. The biggest change here, of course, is the redo of the dorsal spines, giving them a bright translucent blue coloration going all the way down the tail. And for the most part, it really does just use the exact same sculpt as the original version, but it definitely stands out on a shelf with this repaint. The overall paint job beyond that is pretty much the same. I do seem to have a little bit more grayish tan here in the chest on my original version. Also, this version is notorious for having better eyes than its predecessor. Mine look pretty good here. And even the paint around the teeth seems to be cleaned up a bit, as it was notoriously wonky and bleedy looking on the original version. But of course, the real show here are the spines that are spectacular looking. So nice bright blue translucent color. They've added in some silver highlights to it to really make it look like it's crackling with power. Some of this is paint, some of this is translucent. I'm not even really sure what's what, but I think it looks phenomenal. The only real problem, and you can kind of see it here, is that because of the bright blue translucent dorsal plates, if you look at it from the front, every so often that blue color will seep through the gaps, and you'll have little areas like here on his neck where you can see the blue light passing through. Pretty minor complaint for the overall cool effect we get. And we do get some accessories that we didn't get with the original version. The first up is an actual interchangeable hand, so we could pop this hand off. And the hand we pop in its place, well, it's connected to a severed Muto head. The first Muto, hopefully not the last, we get from Monsterarts. And this thing looks great and really makes me want a full-sized figure. It's got the eye right there, all the bloody, gory detailed, slimy lookingness going on, the deep, gaping mouth, burned up back of the head. This just looks phenomenal. A great piece to recreate the climactic end scene of the film. And the coolest part is, you can actually give this to the previous incarnation. On my shelf, I've actually had this hand on the original release and kept the Spitfire just looking badass with his bright spines. But just like any hand, it will pop right onto that joint nice and easy, no real struggle, and I think it looks phenomenal. The other accessory, believe it or not, is an effect piece. We get a display stand here showing the Godzilla 2014 logo, this kind of red splatter going through the middle of it. I don't really like the Tamashii stages when they go and put graphics on them. I kind of prefer just the clear ones, but you know what? This is still pretty cool. We get our standard Tamashii arm, and then we get a very 2014 looking breath effect. This definitely has that kind of fiery, almost liquidy look that the 2014 version had. Very, very cool. Nice translucent blue to match the spines. Kind of has a silver paint on top as the waves go up, and then we have the kind of burst effect here at the end where it would impact something. Another great piece and something that I felt the Spitfire needed, so really happy to have it here. It actually almost seems like they could have put the Muto head with the original release to make that release seem a little cooler and saved this for the Spitfire, and I would have been equally happy, but giving the Spitfire both of these, major bonus. And last but not least, we have the little guy, the Godzilla 1964 Emergence version, and this comes from the fact that in the 1964 film, Mothra vs. Godzilla, Godzilla first appears after being washed up on shore after a hurricane and buried in the sand. So the real big difference here is we get a dirty, dry brushing texture over top of our existing Godzilla 1964 figure. And I think the overall look of it is interesting. I think the dry brushing is a little heavy-handed, but also, if it wasn't heavy-handed, it would look way too much like the original release. No fixes have come in here. We still have the gap here between the spines that I know drives a lot of people absolutely crazy. Still a shorter figure than your normal Monsterarts, but a lot of the same great sculpted detail. The eyes look pretty cool. They kind of give them this glazed-over look, a little more so than the original release, which is, to me, iconic for the 64 version. It just seems like a version that I would have rather them do a slight retool rather than a repaint and give us something that's maybe a little more specific to Ghidorah the three-headed monster, which was a minor redo of the sculpt itself. Or I'm still holding out hope for a Jiras figure from Ultraman. I think that would be really appropriate since we basically have the sculpt mostly done. The original release of this figure came with no accessories. This one, however, does come with an accessory. We get yet another breath effect, a unique breath effect, something we haven't seen before. It's sort of blue, but mostly white, which works for me. The Showa era breath effects usually tended to be like a water spray or something, so this kind of matches that look. It's very jagged in there as the business end, and just kind of a sharp point to go in Godzilla's mouth. Standard Tamashii stage, except for the fact that instead of being a clear stage with some stamped on copyright material, they have now put a stamp here right on top, making it really noticeable and kind of annoying. By comparison, you could see the standard logo there, but I guess they wanted to make it more specific to Godzilla, so they added some Godzilla stuff right on top here. Kinda odd, but whatever. I have enough of these, I could always use a different one instead, but I really do like that it came with this cool breath effect. And I was kind of surprised in doing this review how not expendable some of these figures are. I think it's a pretty common feeling among the collectors of this line that these repaints are a pain in the ass. They're just stall tactics, money-grabbing tactics. And I think that is true in its own respect. But the only figure of this that I really just don't feel anything for is the special color version of the Godzilla 2000. I think he's kind of unnecessary if you had the original. I could say a similar thing for the 64 Emergence version. However, I think that's actually the superior figure of the two. Giving him the extra breath effect, something the original version didn't come with, kind of elevates him and makes him the better of the two options. And if you missed out on the first one, he's going to be much cheaper now, so might as well get him. The other three I kind of rank as various levels of if you're an obsessed fanboy like I am and have to have all these figures, you're probably going to want the three of them. The Comic-Con Explosion probably sits on the lower end of that batch, just being that it's a very specific version of the figure that doesn't really appear in the movie quite like this, but I like having him as my Meltdown Godzilla, and the fact that he's using the older Godzilla body doesn't really bug me, because I'm not really going to pose him in super crazy ways. The Spitfire Godzilla, I think, is phenomenal. I really enjoy having in my collection. I love both of his accessories, and I really just love the bright blue spines on him. I think it makes him stand out amidst the sea of charcoal gray figures. That bright blue just really pops on the shelf. And as much as I really don't want a whole lot more repaints, I wouldn't mind them redoing one or two other Godzillas with a similar effect, just because I think it turned out really well here. And if I'm going to say it about any of these, the absolute gem of this set is the Godzilla Jr Rebirth version. Because, well, it's a better articulated body that's taking the place of the original release Godzilla. That figure has been made absolutely obsolete by the existence of this new one. And you can even see these two right up front, the Comic-Con Explosion and the Junior. That's really giving you the comparison right there of the two bodies side by side. The only thing really that you lose getting this more articulated body for Junior is that he can't put his head all the way up to look like he's swimming like the original release did, but I don't know too many people who are posing their Godzilla in a swimming pose anyway. What's really happened on my shelf is the Rebirth version has become my Heisei Godzilla representation, and I've actually taken that original Godzilla figure, the 94 Godzilla, and he's representing Junior on my Godzilla vs. Destroya shelf. So that's it in a nutshell. It's kind of hard to say recommend or not recommend on these based on the kind of limited nature of them and the, well, if you didn't get them the first time, maybe you want them now, or you might already have it and you don't really need it. It gets kind of convoluted and weird, but those are my overall opinions of these figures. Make sure to follow me on Instagram, username Outside the Box Reviews. Also check me out on Facebook, link below. And until next time, this has been our Outside the Box Reviews. There's more crazy kaiju reviews to come.